Hey everyone, so we are kicking off a new unit. Starting off, we're going to be looking at this concept of political economy. And this, of course, is going to incorporate ideas from economics, which is its own social science that we could spend quite a bit of time on. And in fact, the emphasis here will be largely on basic ideas of economics, but we're not going to go into real great depth on any of them. It's kind of more of an overview of how these ideas work and then how they interact with politics and with the state. And so as we see here, political economy is answering the question of how do people use politics to create and distribute wealth. Our definition of political economy is the study of the interaction between states and markets. Okay, so economic systems. Economic systems are obviously a central part of how we operate in society. They also very well define how a state operates. But maybe they're kind of less visible in some ways than what we see of the political system. We don't think so much about what our voting practices, how we participate in the economy. And because of that, they can often be seen as natural, just kind of the way things are, the way things operate. But in fact, they heavily rely on institutions and they're made up of institutions, rules, norms, and values on which a society operates. So this means that the way that business is done, that commerce is done, that trade is done, they are all connected with the type of economic system that you have. And once that system is constructed, people really have a hard time imagining life without them. It's very difficult to think of, going about your life in an exchange that's different. Obviously, our systems have been pretty thrown into disarray lately with COVID, but the anchoring foundation for our economic system is still pretty much the same. So, this, of course, is a major area in that freedom versus equality struggle, which we talked about in our first unit. As when you have goals for your society or your state as a government, then what do you want to pursue, right? And so that's going to be very tied to the economic system as to what it's likely that you're going to be able to achieve. And with that system, do you have a goal of freedom? Is it equality? And of course, this is going to involve the government, the state, the regime, in terms of what their emphases are, what they're trying to do, their priorities. And according to the ideology that you have, you're going to have real difference in things like wealth distribution, income inequality, that kind of thing. Okay, so this is going to be pretty heavy on terminology, different words, but I'm going to have them on the screen and then I'll read and talk about, a little bit more about what is really meant there. And so I talked about political economy already at the top there. And then we have the idea of markets. So what is a market? Well, market is the interaction of supply and demand. You have buyers, you have sellers, they're out there interacting through economic choices they make. And this is why we talk about the market for like wheat and phones and labor. So this is not a physical thing. It just kind of means a venue of exchange, but sort of an imagined one that's out there happening. So you have people who want to sell things, you have people who want to buy things, and then they get together and they do that. And that can include, notice, even labor. Labor is the work people do, but there are people providing labor and there are people who want labor. So when they are able to kind of get together, make arrangements, then this is that process, and that's what happens. All right, then you have property. Property is simply the ownership of goods and services. It's probably pretty straightforward, so I won't spend a lot of time there. You wouldn't think it'd be a controversial thing, but for some of the ideologies, and systems actually that we're going to study, it can be something that people take issue with to an extent. All right, next is a phrase that you might not have heard, and this is public goods. And I'll tell you, this is white quibble with like the book definition that you find in this book. Just because I studied economics some and think that they maybe leave out one thing that's sort of important for what a public good is. But I went ahead and added that to this definition. So a public good is something provided or secured by the state, and they are available for society. So this means no one person or organization can own them. And what I put after that is it's impossible to exclude individuals from their benefit. So what this means is when you have something like fire protection, um, or like protecting good air quality, it's really difficult to, or police protection, let's say. It's really difficult to say we're going to give police protection to this neighborhood, but we're going to like pick and choose houses within that neighborhood where we're going to protect number 105, but not number 110. Yes to 115 and 120, but not 125. Ordinarily, it makes much better sense where we say, actually, you're out there providing benefits for the whole society, so we need to collectively fund this thing. And that gets into the idea of taxation, which we'll talk about later. But so public goods, they're provided by the state. No one owns them. They're just kind of provided for all. And then importantly, you can't exclude individuals from their benefit. So it's provided for everybody, not for specific people or businesses or entities of some kind, like organizations. So this is a little different from social expenditures, which is the last note here. And sorry, the thing pops up there at the bottom, but yeah. So which social expenditures are the state's provision of public benefits. So most people, even very like freedom-oriented type people who don't like the idea of the state being the one to provide very much for anyone, are still okay with the state providing public goods. They would say, okay, it doesn't really make sense for us to have a million private police forces or private fire or these kind of things. So we will have the state provide those things, and they will be paid for by everybody. In social expenditures, on the other hand, people can agree and disagree whether these things are good, because this is when the state is the one to step in to provide some type of benefit. But this is things that you could conceivably exclude some people from. So, like certain health benefits, for example, right? I could go to the doctor and say, I need my bone repaired, and they could look at me like, no, you're not paying for this, so we can turn you away. Some people feel like the state ought to provide that benefit. That's just like a good thing the state should do. Others say, no, I can take care of my own health. I shouldn't be obligated to pay for someone else's poor choices if they don't take care of their health. So, but the big difference is, you can exclude someone from this, and also, it's just, yeah, not something that is automatically a benefit for all in the same way as a public good. Okay, so how then do we pay for these things like public goods and social expenditures? Ordinarily, most commonly through taxation, and taxation being the system used to collect money to pay for public goods and expenses. There are some other ways governments can make money. They could maybe sell weapons, for example, to another country. They could do other things as well, like nationalize certain businesses and sell them. But in most, the most common thing that all governments do to some extent is to tax their population. And this is just something, it can be done different ways, but ultimately it says, hey, you participate in this society, you get some benefit from it. You are protected from our military, by our military, for example, and so you should have to pay something for that. And it is obligated, money to be paid. Okay, but a state's interaction with the economy is not only limited to its taxation and paying out of benefits and public goods. It has other parts to play as well, such as the presence of a central bank. Now, the central bank is established in a little bit different ways depending on the country, but ultimately, what its role is to be the institution, as it says here, that controls how much money flows through the economy and the cost to borrow money in that economy. So, for example, in the United States, the central bank, it is able to set an interest rate, and because yeah, money ultimately flows in and out through the central bank. It can then loan money out to regular private banks at a rate. It's usually a very low rate, and then the banks can turn around and lend money out at slightly higher rate so they can make some money. And it can get a lot more technical than that in terms of trying to understand the function and if it's good what the central bank does. But ultimately, you can just think of it as this central institution that money flows in and out of. And it has a lot to do with setting the monetary policy of a country, like what it does with its money. Okay, so then you have a couple ideas here that they are, they can easily be confused, but they do opposite things. You have inflation and deflation. Inflation is a more commonly heard term. We tend to understand it at least a little bit better and maybe hear about it more. And the reason is it's much more commonly experienced in the world. So you may have heard things like, oh, inflation this year was 3% or 5% or something. And when that happens, you know that your money has lost value. And so I'll have some things to demonstrate this a bit more, some things for you to look at. But the reason is money as a commodity functions a lot like any other good. So let's think about this. If, for example, we all of a sudden discover a lot more oil than we realized existed in the world. Well, then the quantity of oil goes way up. What happens to the value of oil? It goes way down, right? Things are tied to how scarce they are. So if something is more available, it is worth less. If it is less available, it is worth more. So inflation happens when there is more actual money out in the money supply, meaning the central bank has released or printed money essentially. If you print out money and just distribute it out, and there's more and more money going out into the money supply, that money starts to be worth less. So therefore, it's the loss of the value of money. And what does that lead to when money is worth less? Well, if I want to feed my family the same way, I have to increase my prices. If I own a store or a restaurant, then my money is not worth as much. Um, I, People know that they're going to send their prices up, and I'm going to need to send my prices up too. So it comes about because there's more money in the money supply. The important things to take away from this are that money loses its value and prices go up when you have inflation. Deflation, on the other hand, that might sound like a good thing because, oh, we have dropping prices and an increase in the value of money and your buying power. But deflation can actually be pretty hazardous for some other reasons that I will get into in class. Okay, and regulations. Regulations simply are rules or order that set the boundaries of a given procedure. So this is not anything particularly conceptual. It's just that, countries can say, for example, if you're going to sell meat into our country, like, any kind of product, we're going to monitor it in some sense, have restrictions on that. So we want to verify, for example, that it was cared for in a way that is hygienic, that is safe. And so this is a type of regulation that can be put in place. And these are ways that governments intervene in the workings of the economy. Okay, and just as an extreme example of what inflation can look like when it gets way out of hand, here we have an image of a banknote from Zimbabwe for $100 trillion. Well, what happened? How do you get to this? And I can tell you, you're not rich if you had $100 trillion of Zimbabwean money in this time. The reason is they had printed tons and tons and tons of money. And so that money became worthless. People realized, hey, they've just been printing this like it's going out of style. It's no longer worth anything to me. I'm going to need $100 trillion to buy even the smallest thing. And this is what's called hyperinflation. So I'll leave it at that for now. We'll pick up with a few more concepts here in a minute and hope this made some sense. See you all soon.